The Northern and Western Regional Assembly has just published a report on regional vacancy and dereliction, which shows that 44,905 residential and commercial properties are empty in the 5 Connacht counties and the 3 border counties of Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan. This is 1/3 higher than Ireland's total national annual housing requirement of 33,000 homes. Taoiseach, there are whole streets in our towns and villages that have not had a football kicked on them in a generation. 40% of the vacant homes in this country are in these 8 counties, many of them vacant family homes close to schools and services, including having 1,000 megabits per second broadband outside their door. The housing crisis is not just about a lack of houses, but also our failure to have empty homes occupied by families, particularly those in our towns and villages. The fact is that if these homes were occupied, this would have an immediate dividend to the state and to rural Ireland, as well as homeless families. This is a point that I've been making for some years, and thankfully Minister Darragh O'Brien and the Government have taken on board my suggestions, and a whole section of the new Housing for All strategy is focused on how we can bring families back into empty houses across our country. But that strategy, Taoiseach, was published last September, and we're still awaiting its implementation. Taking County Roscommon as an example, we have the perverse situation that even though we have a vacancy rate of 14%, with 4,090 empty homes throughout County Roscommon, there are just 18 homes for rent and 230 for sale, according to daft.ie. Yet local auctioneers have waiting lists for people looking to buy or to rent family homes. In East Galway, where demand is considerably higher for housing, many of our villages do not have access to any wastewater treatment facilities. In fact, in a number of instances, we have raw sewage running through the streets. Taoiseach, there needs to be a strategic approach to addressing this problem, rather than trying to dump responsibility back on councils, which have not been able to utilise the repair and leasing scheme to bring vacant properties in need of repair back into use for social housing, or indeed repair the 3,900 local authority houses that remain empty across our country.
Thank you, Deputy. Please.
First of all, I thank the Deputy for raising the issue, and I welcome the report from the Northern and Western Regional Assembly on vacancy and dereliction analysis in the region. Just didn't realise you had written the chapter in the Housing for All, but you're correct in that section. It deals with the issue of vacant houses, but in particular the need to a Towns First policy to really get vacant houses or derelict houses back in play, if you like, to reconstruct them, to enable their reconstruction. Now, there's a number of ways we can do that. We can tax vacant properties to incentivise people to get them developed. We can create incentives, which we will, to help people to move towards refurbishing or bringing a house back into use as a home and as a residential property, which I think is the desired outcome, as well as creating activity within a town and within a village. I mean, your study concentrates on towns and villages across the northwest, and I'd like it to go, perhaps engage with you in terms of going through it in greater detail, in terms of the model that's used and so on, and identifying those houses and saying, you know, can we, at a more micro level, get some of these issues dealt with on the ground, because there has been a range of schemes prior to Housing for All, the repair and lease being one that doesn't seem to have got the desired return or output. I suppose this year, the interesting news just before I come into the House, in 2021 now we've had about 30,724 commencement notices. So there's significant evidence of the construction sector now really picking up. We had 2 lockdowns in 2020 and 2021, which did affect construction output, but it's been a very significant bounce back to such an extent that we've had 1,724 commencement. That augurs well. It's the highest ever for quite a long time. And I think that's part of the approach. But I think in terms of the rejuvenation of the regions, and the North West being one, we need a very targeted, focused policy in terms of enabling vacant houses that have been described in this report to be brought back into use for families or for people generally who are either on our housing list or who are in search of affordable housing. And there's a range of measures in the Housing for All that can enable us to do that. Just to say that in terms of local authority and social housing, since this government came into office, 5,500 social homes have been brought back into use over 18 months. These would be the typical local authority voids, and that's through dedicated funding. 1,500 void homes are to be remediated and brought back into use this year, in 2022. Those are important, I think, measures to counter the level of vacancy that has been described in this particular report. I think the local authorities, by the way, finally, will have a very significant role to play in this.
Taoiseach, I know that there are commitments to provide funding to councils to support the refurbishment of vacant properties in our towns and villages, as well as to compulsory purchase vacant properties. But these provisions, in some guise, have been available up to now with limited impact. And despite the publication of the Housing for All pathway to maximise the efficient use of our existing housing stock last September, your government passed the reforms to the Nursing Home Fair Deal scheme without addressing the treble tax on nursing home residents who wish to rent out their former family home. Taoiseach, I believe that our local towns and villages and rural areas will benefit from this plan, but this must be followed through with the actions, especially in the West, the North West and the border counties where we have such very large vacancy rates.
Yeah, I would agree with that in terms of the latter point in terms of those in nursing homes in terms of having their houses available for rent. No, there have been issues which have been argued to and fro in terms of protecting people as well and safeguarding the rights of people who may be in nursing homes. But that said, the overarching priority now is housing and the provision of all available units for the purposes of housing. And so work is underway to resolve